Alrighty, welcome back to our coverage for MXP Los Angeles. We're just gonna
Yeah,
go over what. Ed?
yeah, really excited to be here casting some Modern with you, Nar.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun. We've seen 12 rounds of gameplay in the Swiss, and there's one match left until we cut to top 8. There are 33 players in day 2, and as you can see, we've had 12 grueling rounds so far, just one left until we get to see who made top 8.
Yeah, a lot of the top 8 slots already sort of locked up as people, qualify, made it to a record where they're going to be able to draw in or lock to make it for top 8. But I believe both the matches we're making you are very much for making top 8. So one of them is like pretty directly a winning in. The other one, a little closer to the lines. The players will be sweating it a little. But we should be watching some people actually qualify for top 8 to lock up some of these prizes this round of coverage.
Yeah, that's correct. We've got 4 players who've drawn in, and there's 4 matches going to qualify, and we've got 2 of those 4 matches where people are playing for it ready to show you. But before we do, got a couple things to say. First of all, there's the prize distribution, so we know what the players are playing for. There's $20,000 in prizes, and we're at the point where each win matters a lot, with each win being roughly double as much as you would get from your prizes.
Yeah, notably, the players this round are also playing for a top 8 slot, which will get them an invitation for the regional championship in Portland, and that feeds into the Pro Tour. So, not just players not just playing for cash, playing for a ticket in the organized play system to maybe try and play at the highest level.
Speaking of playing for a ticket, there's another thing that these players are playing for. The top 4 of this event qualify for the MXP Championship at the end of this year. And it's a 32-player event with $10,000 in prizes. It's going to be some high-stakes magic from the best of the best this year, from the people who've been absolutely crushing it. And I'm excited to see who gets to qualify.
Yeah, you mentioned. Looking at this slide here, in addition to the top 4 players qualifying, there's at-large points, I believe, from a leaderboard maintained over the course of this season. So again, every match win matters, even if players aren't qualifying for this, even if the players are already qualified for the regional championship. The points matter, the cash matter. There's lots to play for here.
Alrighty, and I believe our match is ready. And tell me, Arya, what do we have waiting for us?
So I believe we're up against Griffin Bishower on Bant Nadu versus Mardu Energy in the hands of Lee Tilford. Tilford Lee. And yeah, this is sort of one of the uh, matches that's kind of defining current Modern, where Bant Nadu very much the deck to beat, kind of the strongest deck going into something like this. And Boros Energy and its offshoots have been one of the major contenders for MH3, one of the stronger decks to pop at that could actually challenge the Nadu Menace. And so, pretty foundational matchup in this current Modern. I have to imagine both these players have played a lot of it.
Alrighty, and looking at the opening hands, we've got a Thoughtseize, Ocelot Pride, a Johnny, Galvanic Bombardment, and Bowmasters from Tilford Lee. Is this a good hand? Does this have the pressure and disruption you want?
Yeah, very much so. So, possibly the strongest thing this Mardu energy deck can do, and indeed any of the red-white energy decks can do, is, or one of the strongest things, is assemble Goblin Bombardment plus a Johnny that lets you generate a lot of value and applies pressure very quickly while interacting with your opponent's board, which is really, really important against a deck like Nadu. So that paired with Thoughtseize is kind of perfect for this deck. I mean, maybe you'd like some one-drop pressure. It's hard to gauge in a matchup like this whether you'd rather be playing out a threat like Ocelot Pride on turn 1 or Thoughtseizing on turn 1 to have interaction for your opponent's combo plan. But either way, the whole Bombardment plus Ajani with Disruption at some point along the curve is going to be really, really strong for this Mardu Energy deck.
And if you're playing a Bant Nadu, what do you want to have out of your hand to combat this disruption like this?
So
As
notably against a Mardu deck like this, you really, really want to make sure your creatures live through Orcish Bowmaster. You want to have things like Lighted Halfling that kind of survive that. More reliance on things like that than Spring Heart and Tuco, because Bowmasters and recurring Bowmasters is really important. Uh, Something to answer Goblin Bombardment like the Boseiju we saw in Griffin's hand, kind of nice. The only issue with that is it's a little tempo negative. You want to kind of be able to race this Mardu deck pretty well, so it's a pretty tough dance of whether you want to have a hand that's really fast and could potentially race this, or have a hand that's a little more resilient to the disruption from things like Thoughtseize and Goblin Bombardment. So when you're going down to 5 like Griffin did, there's not really any good answers in terms of what you want your opener to be.
Yeah, and with the Thoughtseize from Tilford lead, the only choice is to take a halfling. And Griffin's in a spot where it's one of the better spots you can be where you mull to 5 and get Thoughtseize on turn 1, where he's set up to be able to just draw into an out and can get there, but he does kind of need a lot, and Tilford is going to be setting up to get a fast clock.
Yeah, in Griffin's spot, Thoughtseize there is actually maybe pretty close to the perfect thing to see from Tilford, where his hand didn't have any threats. He kind of needs to draw into his combo pieces at some point. He needs to like get that engine going at some point, but his hand's only mana ramp. And so seeing your opponent take the turn one interacting with a piece you don't actually care that much about, instead of playing out something aggressive like an Ocelot Pride, a Guide of Souls, is actually really, really good news for Griffin. So I have to imagine he's very happy with that.
Now, for Tilford here, what do you think he plays? Is he supposed to play Surveil Land plus Pride? Supposed to play a 2-drop? Which one?
So I think in Dilford spot, it's all about trying to develop a Johnny plus bombardment in some order. And so I think it's tempted. I think in a spot, I like to definitely play out one of the 2-drops. It's not really a strong preference for what it is. If Dilford had maybe had some way to gain life, there'd be some argument for waiting on the Ajani. Then maybe you can play it the turn you're going to play out Ocelot Pride and kind of get an extra cat off the Pride trigger. But as it stands, given that there's no easy way for him to gain life here, it makes sense to me for him to play out a Johnny first to actually try and apply some pressure.
Yeah, and Griffin having the Springheart Nantuko, which is an excellent card, bestowing on the halfling so it can't get pinged by the Goblin Bombardment, and it can just provide a continuous stream of tokens. So even if he's
Yeah,
not doing anything right now, he's still setting up so a Nadu is almost an immediate kill.
yeah. So this is really nice for Griffin. It puts a lot of pressure on Tilford to answer things with high toughness in ways that is kind of tricky with a Johnny plus bombardment. I do think that in this spot, Tilford is going to be able to answer the Delighted Halfling and the Spring Hot Nantuko on top of that with Goblet Bombardment plus Ocelot Pride, because he can ping the Delighted Halfling by sacrificing the cat, zero a Johnny to deal the Delighted Halfling the remaining damage, and then sacrifice the replacement cat to finally finish off the Spring Hot Nantuko that was on the Delighted Halfling, all with an Ocelot Pride left over after if he wants to.
I'm
But
not
I
sure
think he
there's any
needs
untapped.
another untapped land for that. I'm not sure if he
Yeah,
has.
the Rockios Theater is normally really good to be able to fetch, but sometimes you have to draw it, and in matches like these where you need the lands every turn, it's a bit punishing to just not be able to cast all the spells you need.
Yeah, this is kind of brutal actually for Tilford. I mean, it highlights one of the issues with playing Rakdos, branching out into that third color for a little more interaction. It really highlights that some you lose a bit in terms of consistency and speed. There was no one drop aggressive threat played from Telford. This turn we're seeing a tap land, and so very much a cost to this third color. It's not all upside, and the reason why which combination of colors is played is still pretty hotly debated at this point.
Alrighty, and it looks like Telford's choosing to play an Orcish Bowmasters, choosing to get rid of one of the 1/1s and set up for a wider board. Do you like this
Yeah, that
play,
makes
knowing that Griffin surveilled a card to the top?
That makes a lot of sense to me. There's not really a way Tilford could actually do anything about what Griffin has going on. If Griffin draws a Nadu, the game's over anyway. Because a Johnny can't take down that Spring Hot Nantu code, Delighted Halfling. At least this way you get to clear the board up a little and set up to basically win the game if you untap. But given there was a card surveilled to the top, it's not clear whether that's going to happen.
And it looks like that was a Chord of Calling. And Springheart Nantuko being an enchantment and not a creature means that Griffin can't convoke this for 3 to get out a Nadu.
Yeah, it's not clear to me whether Griffin has any cards in hand other than that card. If he was hellbent in that spot, it makes a lot of sense for Tilford to go for the line that he did, because he's probably losing to a Nadu anyway, and this line beats Card of Calling because you're only going to leave 2 things in play.
Yeah, there were no cards in hand, and this Goblin Bombardment lines up perfectly against the board, making sure that Griffin won't have an opportunity to get enough creatures to chord for the Nadu that he needs.
Yeah, so in this spot, I wouldn't actually be all that surprised to see Griffin do something like God for Haywire Might in response to the Goblin Bombardment activation to maybe try and make sure
Ooh.
he has a Springheart Nantuko left afterwards. So what that does is, if Griffin cards for Haywire Might in response to the Bombardment activation, Ajani is still going to take down the Springheart Nantuko, but this might at least let something live through the this might let something live through that. Let the Nantuko itself live through that, since there won't be a Goblin Bombardment to take it down afterwards.
Choosing to chord for 2. Volatile Stormdrake is a very interesting pick. Just
Yeah,
answers the
Stormdrake.
Ajani.
The problem is that there's this Ocelot Pride on the board, which is notably also a cat. So I believe that could be
Oh,
sacrificed to keep the Ajani around.
yeah, that's unfortunate for Griffin if that's what he's trying to do.
Yeah, the nice thing about Stormdrake though is if Ajani does get sacrificed and there's no if Ajani does get sacrificed to kill the Delighted Halfling, followed by the Springhot Nantuko getting killed, at the very least, Volatile Stormbreak should be able to kill the Ajani itself,
Oh,
because
he's hexproof!
there's hexproof from abilities, so it's not going to be able to get hit by either the Ajani flip trigger or by the Goblin Bombardment ability. So it's going to be able to check the Planeswalker at least.
Oh, that's delightful. That's a really aware play of just knowing that you can get your Stormdrake to kill the Ajani and be stable after the bombardment clears your board.
Yeah, really nice play from Griffin. It leaves him a little better set up for the long game. The only downside to this line is it doesn't leave him set up well at all for the next few turns, where he's definitely going to struggle a little against the fact that there's a Goblin Bombardment online and no Nadu in hand, so would really need to draw one and kind of go off from nowhere. Where I suppose we're not quite at the point where Bombardment can kill Nadu, so there's a turn or 2 window for Griffin to maybe get out of this before Tilford can apply enough pressure to really close it out.
Yeah, and the thing about bombardment on Nadu is that it does give you the Nadu triggers, like even if you don't have an enabler. And with the Shuko in play, that's not going to matter, but it's
Yeah, if Nadu were to come down and get killed here, at the very least, it would give Griffin maybe some more gas to keep going for a little while longer. The nice thing about this line trick is there's so little pressure from Tilford's side. There's been all this disruption played, these clunky tap lands, and now he spent a bunch of resources to deal with Griffin's board. So at least Griffin has quite a while before he's going to end up actually facing a lethal clock. At least a turn or 2, I would imagine.
and with the Stormdrake being up to 5 power, that's just a 3-turn clock on Tilford that even a Flage trigger won't save him from. So this could just be the plan B of, well, you've disrupted me, but I can just play creatures, equip Shuko to them, and turn them sideways.
Yeah, I could see that being the line Griffin wants to go for. The problem is that Flage getting escaped is going to make racing pretty impossible.
Yeah, it's not something you can reasonably beat. I think Griffin needs to draw the Nadu now, or something to deal with the Flage.
Yeah, I don't know how updated life totals are, whether they accounted for both that Flage and the attack. If they didn't, we might be looking at a lethal in a turn or 2.
I believe they're correct. It is interesting that Griffin's choosing to hold Stormdrake up to block, prioritizing his own life total.
Yeah, I think you need to. I don't think there's really any reasonable way of racing Tilford here. It's just about trying to hope you can put a Nadu on board, and that will win the game for you.
If you're Griffin here and you drew a chord, would you chord for might end step, or would you try and save it to get a Nadu?
That's a pretty tough choice. In all honesty, neither of those options seem particularly likely to win. I wonder whether there's something else to be carded for that that gives Griffin a chance, maybe in a turn or two. I'd have to look at his deck list, but yeah, I wonder whether there's like Spring Hot Nantuko lines, maybe. I think this is a little off from card actually being like a relevant piece of cardboard. So I imagine you just get Haywire Might or some other one drop.
Yeah, and Griffin's at a perilous life total, down to just 3 life with 2 creatures in play from Telford. If Telford is any creature, this is game.
Yeah, so it looks like life totals weren't actually updated when we saw 11 life. So that explains the holding back from Griffin in the block.
Yeah, that. Oh, and making a token off of the Ocelot Pride means that even if Griffin
Yeah,
has
so this is
something,
very much lethal. Even just the Pride as a piece of cardboard would have been enough to deal Griffin the 3 damage needed there.
yeah, and now we're going on to game 2. Now, what do you think these players will have to sideboard against each other? What does Mardu Energy usually have for Nadu?
So looking at the deck list, what Tilford has here is Harsh Mentor is notably the card that's most for this matchup. We see a full 4 copies of that in Tilford's deck. It's impossible for Nadu to combo through Harsh Mentor, or pretty close to impossible. So I have to imagine that that's the main piece he's leaning on. Maybe a little more interaction, but yeah, I imagine Harsh Mentor is what it's all about post board, and maybe trying to increase the pressure your deck applies. Given the lack of 1 toughness things in Griffin's deck, maybe even consider cutting those Orcish Bowmasters. Just generally getting Lena lower to the ground. We see like some slightly slower stuff uh, in Tilford's main deck, and I have to imagine that a lot of that gets cut. Meanwhile, for Griffin on the Nadu side, you want to make sure you have interaction for stuff like Harsh Mentor. So Dismember makes a lot of sense, or just general interaction for creatures. One Ring really good at buying time against the Boros deck, so I wouldn't be surprised to see that come in as well. And beyond that, just little pieces of interaction to make sure that you can live and really like deal with Tilford's answers to the Nadu side. That game, we saw the Nadu deck come actually surprisingly close to winning that game. Like there were several turns where Nadu off the top would probably have won, and I want to note that that was on a multi 5 for Griffin. That was on a multi 5 on the play even. So a testament to the deck strength and its staying power in a matchup like this, where the deck's really good at presenting the lethal combo over and over and over again. And it's all post board. It's all about making sure that you can continue doing that and maybe deal with any pieces of interaction the Mardu deck will have for it.
Do you think that more excessive pieces of hate, like Burrington Forge Tender or Reclamation Sage, which answer Harsh Mentor and Goblin Bombardment, come in as well, just to prepare for Telford's angle of attack?
It's worth considering. I think it's pretty close. I think Reclamation Sage is more for matchups where you will struggle to activate Haywire Might. You just need a critical mass of like artifact or enchantment removal for combo interaction your opponent could have. So I don't think it will come in as a reactive tool. I think you very much want to be focusing on comboing in this deck uh, rather than trying to deal with your opponent's pieces and 1-for-1 them. Something like Brenton Forge Tender also pretty awkward into what Tilford has going on, where it's not the strongest against Goblin Bombardment because your opponent's not going to put a whole stack of pile of bombardment triggers on the stack. They're going to do it one by one, and that's going to invalidate a lot of what Forge Tender does in terms of protecting against damage-based removal.
That makes sense. And both players seem to have gone off to slightly slower starts. No plays on one for either of them.
Yeah. It's worth noting that some of these cards might be coming in as one-offs. I could see as a possibility. Fortune it does protect against Harsh Mentor, I believe. It prevents the
Oh,
damage for a turn, so that's something it can do for in the matchup. It's not completely dead cardboard, and I could see again a one-off in your card deck is really, really valuable to have access to. So I could see Griffin bringing that in, but yeah, a lot not the most useful creature generally, and you want to make sure you have a critical mass of combo pieces. So it's a matter of how many of these pieces of interaction Griffin really wants to bring in, because I don't think it can do all of them.
and looks like Silver chose to fetch for Surveil Land, trying to hit land number 2, which he thankfully did. And he has the Thoughtseize, trying to take apart Griffin's game plan.
Yeah, I want to draw attention to that hardcast Springheart Nantuko here, where game one, I think we'd almost never see that happen, where Springheart Nantuko is kind of the only card in your deck that's a liability to Orcish Bowmaster, so it's really, really awkward to just run it out on 2 on the play. But post board, where we think Bowmasters are maybe getting trimmed, there's a little more efficient interaction than Bowmasters, and cards that do more generally than Bowmasters, which doesn't trigger very often against Griffin's deck. So you'd maybe expect to see something like Bowmasters a lot less. And given that, it makes sense for Griffin to run out the Spring Art Nantuko, knowing it's far from guaranteed to be safe, but a lot more likely to be safe, and there's not really a good spot in the rest of the curve of his hand to run it out.
That's a good point. It's good to point out how boarding cards out means that you can play cards more aggressively and just how much the play patterns change.
Yeah, and this is a tough spot for Tilford, where sure he answered the combo pieces 1-for-1 Griffin a bunch, but he's missing land drops, falling behind on board, and we're gonna see the Nadu deck's fair game plan maybe be kind of terrifying for this Mardu deck, where there's a bigger creature on board for Griffin. There's gonna be more big creatures in the constructs, and there's Harsh Mentor on board, not exactly keeping up with the larger creatures that are gonna be in play. So Griffin doesn't even really need to combo here. You can just apply the beatdown to Tilford, and he's going to be pretty far behind unless he can find answers to Nadu and maybe the Saga tokens.
Yeah, and the 3/4 body from Nadu is going to be putting in a lot of work. But Stilford's dropping down to 12. It's the point where he can reasonably just die to beats, and he can't answer the Nadu because there's a second copy in hand.
So I have to imagine this is a wear tear that's being left up for Tilford. If he does it end of turn, then that can get both the construct and the Urza Saga, which is pretty nice. Kind of answer the whole card in one. That said, this quote unquote good interaction for him still leaves Griffin up a card because he gets to draw off the Nadu trigger and down a land instead of a spell. So it speaks a lot to how badly off Tilford is when his good exchanges are this unfavorable.
Yeah, but it looks like, let's see, Nadu trigger gets a windswept heat, so he's not even down a land, and now he gets to either is both surveil lands out of the deck. So he doesn't get to surveil before he draws, but that's still an extra land in play.
Yeah, I could see this getting a Dryad Arbor just to, again, apply more pressure, put Dilford on a faster clock, and yeah, just leave him in a tough spot where any answer to the Nadu, let's say, any answer to the Harsh Mentor threatens a combo, and just like Griffin would be ahead on a fair axis as well. Yeah, notably, Harsh Mentor tags abilities off lands that are mana abilities, so very much is kind of pressuring both players' life totals a bunch, with these fetch lands costing them daily.
And it looks like there still was a surveil land left in the deck as Griffin surveilled a wall of roots into the graveyard.
Yeah, I don't know what's left in Griffin's hand at this point. We're getting to the point where that life total is actually starting to look rather low. Where if Griffin wants to crack that Waterlog Grove, that is yet another that is yet another 2 points of damage he'd be taking off that Harsh Mentor. So it looks like there might be mostly lands in hand, and that's pretty tough for Griffin.
At least Sotawara is an answer to Mentor, where I think Mentor doesn't trigger off of it.
It does not, because Mentor triggers off cards off of permanents on the battlefield and not land cards in hand. So Griffin could bounce the Mentor and then untap, crack Waterlog Grove, look for a Shuko, and try and go off.
Yeah, and its position's a bit precarious, and it looks like a double amped Raptor, which is quite a wide board just from nothing. And I think we're getting a bit of confusion with how double amped Raptor works, where the second copy enters from exile, so it makes 2 energy, but you don't get to cast another card off of it since it wasn't cast from your hand. So
Yeah, somewhat complicated wording there, where you'd think that the ability just wouldn't trigger if it was cast from exile, but it very much gets the energy if you do to not make it that bad a punisher run multiples off. At least you're getting your resource back. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
yeah, and off the
Wonder
Guide
what's
of
being
Soul. Go ahead.
I wonder what's being played around here with that lack of an attack from Harsh Mentor. I guess a chord for 2 could let something eat the Harsh Mentor, so it makes sense not to attack into something like that, and instead just leave Harsh Mentor back to block.
And
Oh,
they're
not
calling,
block, but not get eaten by a flash blocker.
and there's a judge being called. I believe they're seeing if Harsh Mentor triggers from the Otawara. Harsh Mentor does explicitly say on the battlefield, so it shouldn't work, but it's good that the players are calling a judge. If you're not sure how the cards work, always call a judge. They're here to help. They'll always make sure that things go as they should.
Yeah, possibly complicated by the wording on the card maybe not being what the Oracle text on US printing is. I'm not entirely sure whether that's been updated. Where even if the card just said, even if the card didn't have on the battlefield written on it, it would still not trigger because that would make Otawara a land card rather than a land.
Yeah, and
Oh,
it's
and is that a Spring Hut Nantuko into Shuko?
oh my goodness, what perfect cards to hit! And then a land is the first hit as well. This is almost all that Griffin could ask for.
Yeah,
That's
I believe this is gonna get maybe a second Spring Hot Nantuko, and this is pretty close to deterministically game. Where at this point each land is gonna get a Griffin 2 more tokens, which is 4 more activations of Shuko. If one of them finds a land, that's 4 more activations. Creatures he finds along the way, if he has them out of cost them, can do nice stuff for him. So yeah, pretty tough spot. I believe what's happening here is Griffin is saying, I have the kill. Rather than going through, I'm going to be drawing my whole deck. And Dilfit said, "Okay, can I just see?" I have to imagine said, "Okay, can I just see your whole deck? That way, I won't have to make you go through it. I want to see how you're killing me / that you can kill me."
yeah, and it looks like Sulfur's just scooping it up as we go to game 3. This close match between Mardu Energy and Bant Nadu.
Yeah, different win conditions for decks like this. Notably, I think in Griffin's spot, the win condition is maybe just Bristly Bill, which can make an arbitrarily large Nadu in play once you so the way these decks win when they don't have Thassa's Oracle, I suppose now it's as good a time to explain to chat as any, is you want to loop you want to loop your entire library with an endurance with a Spring Hot Nantuko bestowed on it and Sylvan Safekeeper. So you can make copies of endurance, sacrifice all your lands, make a copy of endurance, put them all back in your deck, get them all back into play with Shuko activations for Spring Hot Nantukos. Do that an arbitrary number of times, and then how you win kind of depends on the list in question. This deck and on this board state could have won with Bristly Bill, putting an arbitrary number of counters on Nadu and attacking with that for lethal. But there's a lot of different actual finishes for the deck available. Frequently, you can Beseiju all your opponent's lands, so you know they don't have any lands left. Otawara all left in the deck, that is, or in play, other than maybe a few basics. You can Otawara all their non-land permanents. So yeah, once you go off, sometimes the deck isn't technically capable of winning the game on that turn, but it's always functionally capable of winning the game on that turn. Generally being able to gain infinite life, remove all your non-land permanents, remove all your lands, make an arbitrary large board.
Yeah, and even with there's plenty of other loops in Griffin's deck, as being pointed out in chat, where Griffin can just arbitrarily win in so many different ways. And it looks like we're starting to get opening hands. Tilford's hand looks pretty solid with Goblin Bombardment, Ocelot Pride, multiple Amped Raptors, and an Ajani. Kind of everything you want with Fast Pressure, Goblin Bombardment, and Ajani combo, and cards that just commit multiple resources to the board.
Yeah, on the play particularly, this hand's really good. You can hope the Ocelot Pride can maybe get in for damage to trigger immediately on turn 2, and that would be huge. Griffin has some number of 1-drops in his deck, like Lighted Halfling, that can block an Ocelot Pride, but not very many of them. So I have to imagine that pretty close to perfect for Tilford. No interaction on one, but that's kind of fine. You don't really want to interact with. You don't care that much about interacting with Nadu until the turn before they can cast Nadu or cast their second combo piece. So it's fine that this hand leads by applying pressure, and then has interaction later in the form of a Johnny plus Goblin Bombardment, which is going to keep Griffin's board down. I have to imagine this is pretty close to an ideal start for Tilford Lee.
One other thing in Tilford's favor is that the other land in Griffin's hand is a Dryad Arbor, which notably has 1 toughness. So if Griffin doesn't get extra lands, that can just die to a ping from Goblin Bombardment and generate a massive tempo swing for Tilford.
Yeah, notably so Griffin mulled to 6, so this is a slightly awkward hand for him. He's keeping despite it not being ideal, and I mean, assertive hands like this that apply a bunch of pressure are definitely the ones that most punish Nadu out of Mardu energy.
And Tilford is thinking, deciding what 2-drop he wants to play, going with a Johnny, deciding to try and get as wide a board as possible, and just put the cats into play.
Yeah, in a spot like this, it's all about applying as much pressure as you can, as quickly as you can. Goblin Bombardment's kind of going to deal with Griffin's board, so you just want to make sure you get as low to the ground as quickly as possible, and put a bunch of threats into place so that once you have your interaction, you can actually end the game. And I believe this is pretty close to game over here, with Tilford being able to get rid of both of Griffin's mana sources between the Dryad Arbor and Johnny flipping to kill the Delighted Halfling. I have a hard time imagining Griffin coming back from that.
This looks completely backbreaking. And even if Griffin manages to hit land drops and play creatures, a Johnny plus Bombardment plus also Pride can kill you in about 2 turns just from 20 life. And
yeah, I believe this is just game in this spot. Particularly because one of the things about Nadu, it is a 2-card combo deck, so to speak, but it does really need to build up a board presence to be able to actually combo. Comboing with just a Nadu from an empty board is very difficult. And so Ajani kind of keeping down Griffin's board presence the whole time means even comboing out of nowhere is not really an option.
yeah, and with only 1 land in play, it's going to take a bit for Griffin to work up to having that board in the first place. And it looks like 9 permanents. So no City's Blessing yet. And Griffin scoops it up. No more land drop for him, so that's just game. And Tilford Lee has gone on to make top 8.
Yeah, pretty impressive throwing. Really showing why even in the face of a deck like Nadu, The energy deck is the one to be feared, where a Johnny plus Goblin Bombardment is so good at just taking over the game and incidentally dealing with your opponent's entire board.
Goblin Bombardment's a huge, more recent innovation from the deck that I absolutely adore. It definitely carried Tilford in the first and third game, and was what let him just put the pressure and convert the random tokens that you end up making with the deck into getting rid of Nadu's key creatures that are what lets the deck function.
Yeah, an innovation that I think really highlights the breadth of Magic and the various formats we have, where Goblin Bombardment is something I believe originally came from the arena only historic format, where the Boros Energy decks there started playing it, and they quickly became adapted into modern because it was a similar shell, and it's just strength with the Johnny was highlighted. So I think does a good job showing off just how like Magic has a lot of different formats, and they may seem really different from each other time to time, but many things from them carry over to each other, and it highlights the subtle ways these formats kind of influence each other.
Yeah, and I think that overlap is I really enjoy that overlap because it means that players can get rewarded for playing all these different formats. And being able to translate knowledge like that is just nice for the sake of deck building and letting Magic grow and breathe, because you can try all sorts of different things. And that breadth of things you can try is important for letting people innovate.
I believe we now actually have our top 8 ready. Uh, the round is done, slots are all tied up, and we should be able to show y'all who made top 8.
Alrighty, so who do we have? Well, in first place, there's Alexander Soderberg on Bant Nadu. Second place is Gabriel Bostic on Jeskai Control. Third is Paul Green on Bant Nadu as well. Fourth is Robert Cedar on Jeskai Control. Fifth is John Wong on Demir Murktide. Sixth is Silford Lee, who you just saw on Mardu Energy. Seventh is Richard Neal on Bant Nadu. And eighth is Edward Drew on Bant Nadu. And that's 4 out of 8 of the slots in the top 8 out of 20% of the entries in the tournament. That's a very strong conversion rate for Nadu.
Yeah, definitely kind of a dominant showing for the deck. Only deck I'd say that that's also looking really strong in terms of representation is Jeskai Control, with 2 decks in top 8 pretty impressive, and particularly in second and fourth place. And that makes sense in a format where Nadu's had such a dominant showing, where Jeskai Control is kind of the one deck that can be structured in a way where it's strong against Nadu. You can maybe beat up on it a little bit. And so would be interested to see how that battle kind of plays out in top 8, whether we see some of these decks that are built to be strong against Nadu kind of pan out, or whether Nadu is able to retain its place at the top of the format and take down the event.
Yeah, I'm very excited to see that. One deck I'm excited to see is Demir Murktide from John Wong. Murktide is a deck that's been a classic since Modern Horizons 2, but it's been Izzet deck focusing on the power of Ragavan, Nimble Pilfer, Expressive Iteration, and Dragon Rage Channeler as the red splash. And I believe they're playing Psychic Frog now in black. How does that reflect changes in the format?
It makes a lot of sense to me. The format didn't really have many alternative second strong threats in addition to Murktide. Ragavan and Darcy, Dragon's Rage Chandler, are pretty good at applying early pressure and being really efficient threats, but they're not good at closing out the game the way Murktide is. They're not good at getting recurrent card advantage and scaling into the late game the way Murktide is. And Psychic Frog's a second threat that does that really well. Pairs pretty well with Murktide Regent, where it can exile a bunch of cards from your graveyard late that grow your Murktide Regents as well. So I understand the shift to blue-black is kind of the preferred colors for Murktide, since it gives you this other angle of attack.
Yeah, it's a very interesting innovation. And while there are some times where things can go wrong from Modern Horizon sets, it is really nice to see the way they cause innovations and cause decks to try going in new directions.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, we've seen a lot of like cross horizons innovations here with Psychic Frog plus Murktide, and then Goblin Bombardment plus a Johnny. So interesting to see the way those sets play together.
Alright, I think we're going to go on break for a bit before we cut to top 8. But thank you all for watching. We'll see you soon.
We'll see you on the other side with some top 8 Mardu.